All right, so as we discussed earlier, the first step of the 2-dart bodice is to get yourself a piece of dot paper that gives you a little bit of margin around your front bodice. And you want to make sure that you have a good front bodice, because otherwise you're going to have problems with the rest of your dress, and you want to make sure that the front bodice that you have matches the rest of the pieces of your block, otherwise you'll have issues, more than you already have. So what I do on mine is I draw a grain line first, and then I butt my pattern up to the grain line and trace it off, and then I square off the corners because I have notches and whatnot. So I have one here that I already traced off and squared off the corners. And then my next step is transfer all the markings, right? So you start off, let me show the camera. So you start off with something that has just the notches and the punch holes traced. But then I go through and make sure that all the corners are at 90-degree angles. Show the camera. So all the corners are at 90-degree angles. Make sure that I have the bust level, that I have the apex, because for this particular draft, that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to manipulate around the apex. So I start with that, cut it out, go ahead and put the notches in it, and that's about everything. So then I need a piece of brown paper to manipulate on. So I need a piece of brown paper that's just a little bit bigger than my bodice. Hopefully I got one that's big enough. And again, with the brown paper, just for show purposes, you don't have to do this, but just to show the change that is going to matter in a minute, I traced off the basic block onto the brown paper as well. And where I start with this guy that's cut out is I start with a grain line, and I trace the grain line onto the brown paper, and then I take my cutout block and I line that up to the grain line. And then I tape it down. And the instructions for this are on page 90 of your textbook, I believe.
It's 100 on the.
Okay, so depending on your edition, it's either page 90 or page 100, and it's the 2-dart series, and it's the slash and spread technique. So what we're going to do is, in order to make this shape less conical and more smooth, we're going to take some of this waist dart and we're going to transfer it to the bust level. So that's why I needed my bust level line drawn and my dart legs drawn from the notches to the apex. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut along my dart legs. I'm going to cut my dart out, and I'm going to cut along the apex line to give me my little pivot point. And then I'm going to line the center front up with the center front line on my brown paper and tape it down. So up to the apex, but not through it, because I want the apex to be like my little hinge. So up to the apex, but not through it. And then cut along the bust line up to the apex, but not through it. And now I'm going to tape that down to the brown paper.